Not. I swear it's like there is the first 3 weeks of class, the last 2 weeks of class, and those middle 10 weeks just go like that. For me, I don't know how it is for you folks, but so what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit more about JavaScript, and we'll have the course evaluation. All right. Those of you that are taking this class online, there's a special online evaluation for you. So take that one instead of the one that I'm handing out in class. You are welcome, by the way, irrespective of the formal evaluation system, to feel free to send me comments about what could be improved, about what you liked about the class, about what you didn't like about the class. You know, you can, if you are concerned about that, you can feel free to wait till after the semester's over. But, you know, I take any comments made in good faith, you know, I take them and consider what they have to say. All right, at any rate, Wednesday of this week will be a work day for your project. And more than a work day, I hope it's sort of a showcase day as well. Because take a look to see what other folks are doing. Because they're doing some good stuff, believe me. One of the hidden joys of this class is grading everyone's projects, especially. Because people come up with some cool stuff, some interesting stuff. If you include your pets in the project, I always involve my kids in coming over and showing them pictures of your dogs and cats, just so you know. That's liable to have a positive influence on your grade, but I can't guarantee that. But at any rate, Wednesday is meant to be a work/showcase day on your project. Do keep in mind, if you're taking an online class, you're invited to come in for this as well, or you're invited to post to the bulletin board or send me email questions if you want feedback. I did post an announcement concerning the end of term due dates. The deadline that I gave does not apply to the project. The original due date of the project still holds. I didn't change any due dates by posting that. That's more of a late assignment/redo deadline. All right. So today we're going to wrap up talking about some JavaScript, and let's look at what we were working on last time. Let's see. Trying to find the one with the cats in it. That's not it. That's not it. I think this would be it. Yeah. All right. If we look at the code here, as I said, it follows a recipe of typical JavaScript, and that is, number one, a user event triggers it off, gets the ball rolling. In this case, the user event is the mouse over function, where the user puts the mouse over the thumbnail, and that starts the ball rolling. We looked at another event in another example, and that was the on-click event. Those are two real common events, as you can imagine. Those are the events that are most common way for users to interact. There's others that you can trap key presses when someone presses a key. For example, any of you that are on Twitter know that as you're typing in Twitter, it shows you a countdown of how many characters you have left. A Twitter message is limited to 140 characters. And so as you start typing, you type one character, it shows you have 139 left. 2 characters, 138 left, and so on. That's actually, there's a little piece of JavaScript that is triggered based on you pressing a key. So almost any way that the user can interact with the page can trigger some JavaScript to happen. So we've been sticking to the sort of the basic ones, the on mouse over and the on click. What happens then is that calls the stuff enclosed in quotes is a snippet of JavaScript. I'm trying to highlight it. Goes from the first double quote all the way to the end double quote. And that consists of a series of statements using JavaScript syntax where we use the DOM being the document object model, which allows us to point to things on the page and do something with their attributes. In this case, we're pointing to the thing on the page with an ID of big pic, which is the big picture, and we are changing its src attribute. In that way, effectively, we're putting a different image up in that image tag. Think of the image tag as not necessarily being an image, but the image tag as being like a frame for an image. And as we change the src attribute, we're changing the image that displays in that frame. All right? Separated by semicolons, then we have some additional statements. Now, a couple things that might be apparent at this point in looking just at this example. First of all, this code, as we read across, well, the code isn't complicated. It's a little hard to read in this mode because it's all one line going across and statements are separated by semicolons. We look going across. Hard to read equals hard to change. Right? If you can't read code, it's hard to change code. Or if you have trouble reading code, it makes it harder to change the code. So that's sort of the first problem, is that it's hard to read. All right? So if you just have one statement in JavaScript, yeah, that's okay. But if you have multiple statements in JavaScript, that can make it hard to read. All right? The second thing that should become apparent is that, all right, we have 3 thumbnails here. And big images. What if we had 10 or 20 or whatever? We'd have an awful lot of duplication of code, which means that we'd have to be doing an awful lot of cutting and pasting and editing and all that. Now, what's wrong with that? Well, there's a few things wrong with that. First of all, if you're duplicating code, you're increasing the chance that you're going to make a mistake. You're going to cut and paste something wrong. You're going to change something wrong. Secondly, if we had an enhancement to our page, we'd have to duplicate that enhancement in 20 places and 10 places or whatever. Let's say in addition to showing the cat's image and a name and a little description, we posted a link to a different page, maybe what breed the cat is. You know, we'd have to change that for each image if we had a different link for each cat. All right. That's not really relevant in my case because all my cats are of the same breed. That is, they are simply cats. I have no idea what kind of breed they are. You know, they're just your generic garden variety cat. But, you know, if you had fancy cats with Persians and all the other kinds of cats, and you had a link with that, you'd have to change it for each thumbnail. And again, that means you'd have to duplicate changes and the risk of having an error and so on. So, readability and duplication of code is a problem with the scheme that we've taken here. So there's a functionality built into JavaScript that allows us to define functions. All right? And what are functions? Functions, simply put, are a group of statements that we can define and then later call or invoke. And in other words, we can give a group of statements one name and say, do this. All right? So, if we look, when we view this page, and when we view the cat image, when we put our mouse over a cat, 3 things happen, and there's 3 JavaScript instructions. One changes the heading, one changes the image, and one changes the text description. We can put those 3 statements in a function and simply call that function by one name, and all 3 things happen. All right? So, let's do that. Now, we're going to do this in 2 steps. All right? I'm going to first create the function, then I'm going to make the function better. All right? Because the first step is good enough to illustrate, how you create a function, but without the second step, we're really not getting all the benefits from it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, and I'm going to put in the head section again. That's where this belongs. I'm going to put a script tag. Language equals JavaScript. This works similar to the style tag, all right, in the sense that tells the browser, hey, we're no longer in HTML land, we're in JavaScript land. Just like the style tag tells the browser we're no longer in HTML land, we're in CSS land. So, everything between the start and end tag, start and end script tag, is going to be JavaScript. So I can define a function like this. I type in the word function, again, case sensitive, so lowercase, and we'll call the function changeCat. This is kind of the shell of the function. Has the word function, has the name of the function, has parentheses, which we'll get to in a minute what those mean. Then it has the starting bracket, or brace rather, and an ending brace, and everything between those is our actual body of our function. All right? In JavaScript, those braces are used to group things together into like a block, things that belong together. And in this case, all the statements that belong in the function are included in those braces. So now what I can do is I can go and take these statements I'm going to cut it from there, and I'm going to put the statements here. And now I don't have to put them all in one line. I can separate them into their separate lines. And I can even put comments. Comments in code are little pieces of explanatory text that you insert to tell yourself or anyone else viewing it exactly what we're doing. So I could put a / that indicates that this line is not a JavaScript statement but a comment. And I can say change the image of the cat. Change the cat name. Change the cat description. Now, so many things that we do that I would consider to be good practices in programming, we do to make the code easier to read, easy to understand, and therefore easier to change. All right? Remember, almost any piece of software is going to require change at some point in its life cycle. And changing software can be very expensive. I think I've shown this curve in this class before. That compares the cost of making a change with the stage of the project that it's in. So earlier in the project, it costs a little bit to make a change. In other words, if in your design document, and let's say this is a real project, this isn't a school assignment, but in your design document, if you give the end user your design document and they look and say, no, those aren't my goals. My goals are, 2 of them are good, but the third goal is off base. My third goal is actually such and such. At that point, it's pretty easy to change the project, right? You just change the design document and make some changes to the page, to the design of the pages, and you're good to go. If you wait and make that change and examine it and make that change later on in the project, after it's already been implemented, then the cost goes through the roof. All right? So, what's the implication of that? The implication of that is two things that is critical, and this is critical for any form of software development. Any class that I have, you'll find me saying this virtually same thing. In this class, we're talking about web pages. In a database class, we could be talking about databases. In a programming class, we could be talking about programs. But this causes us to do two things. Number one, spend a lot of time in this stage, which I'll call the design stage of the project, to try to make sure that we're pretty well certain that we're solving the right problems and that we've come up with a good solution. So that's sometimes called front-loading a project, spending a lot of effort at the beginning of a project to make sure you have the design down before you actually begin working. So that's step one. Step number two in this process is writing code that's easy to change. Having that as a primary motivation of your code. And that can involve little things like indenting properly, all right, putting comments in, or it can involve major things like, it's less relevant for web pages, but in other ones, designing your algorithms to work correctly, using functions. I guess that's relevant on a web page. This helps with the maintainability of the site. If we do that, then we'll catch all the errors here, and if we make our site easy to maintain, the cost still increases, but it might increase at a little bit slower rate. So, we might be able to get some benefit that way if we make our code easy to maintain. At any rate, I can go then and comment my code and put it in a function. These are all things that we're doing to make the code easy to maintain. And then I can go down and instead of saying on mouse over equals and have a list of those JavaScript statements, I can simply call that function. On mouse over equals change cat. All right. So now we're going to run it, and it'll act about the same as it did before. All right. I changed the code on the Jackson thumbnail, and sure enough, the Jackson code still works. Okay. So I took the code out of the event, changed it to a function, and then created a function in JavaScript this way. I can later on, I can do similar to what I've done with CSS and put it in an external file. And therefore, if there's a piece of JavaScript code that could be called in from many different pages, I can put that in a separate file and get the same benefit like I do with CSS. Again, the whole bit of putting CSS in an external file is to reuse, make it more maintainable. Again, that curve. Yes? What would your document type be if you saved this separately? Oh, if you saved it separately, what extension? People typically use a .js extension. Yeah, so usually you'd save it as image.js or something like that. Again, as long as you give it the right name and refer to it the right way, you could use any extension, really, even with CSS. It doesn't have to be CSS, but by convention, you do make it CSS. That just makes it a little more clear. All right, what's wrong with this picture? Would this function work if I put it on Simba's mouse over event? In other words, what would happen if I went and did this? Pardon me? Yeah. This function is coded to change the image to an image of Jackson, to change the name to the name of Jackson, and to change the description to a description of Jackson. So I can reuse that code for Simba, but it's really not going to do me what I want to do. All right? Because if I save it and refresh, okay, I put my mouse over Jackson, that's fine. Put my mouse over Simba, it changes it to say that that's Jackson, which isn't correct. All right. So what could we do? Well, one thing we could do is I could make a function that says change cat Jackson and have it set up for that. Or I could make another function that says change cat Simba, then a change cat Cleo. And if I had 10 cats, would be really not that much better off than we were originally, right? Because I'd have essentially 10 copies of the same code. And if I went to add a little bit of functionality to that, I'd have to add it in all 10 places. So writing a separate function for each cat isn't really the answer. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to create my function with arguments. All right? Another word for argument is parameters. Now, this is a key concept, and a concept some folks have problems with. All right? Let's look at Excel for a second. Because if you've done any Excel, you've all have used functions with arguments. All right, let's go in here and let's put in a value. Actually, let's format this to be really big. So let's put a value in here of 144 and a value of 64 and a value of 16. All right. Then let's say I want to put a formula in to calculate the square root of that. Gee, what's the formula for a square root? I don't know. SQRT. So I could say equals SQRT the value of the cell F1. And then I could copy it down. All right? So, here's my number. This column contains the square root of that number. Now, if you notice, there's only one square root function, right? There's not a square root function to give me the square root of 144. And then a separate square root function to give me the square root of 64. And then a separate square root to give me the square root of 16. You can see that's probably pretty absurd, right? You'd have to have an infinite number of square root functions to handle every single possible number. Well, obviously, that would make Microsoft Office even more expensive than it already is if it had an infinite number of functions in it. So instead what they do, there's one square root function that includes an argument or a parameter. So, that's additional information about what you want to do. So, we want to do a square root, okay? The square root of what? The square root of the value in F2. In this case, what do we want? We want the square root of the value of F3, F4. We could do that for as many numbers as we had. So we have a function that does a certain operation, does a certain activity, and it could be any kind of activity. In this case, I did square root. There's other functions in Excel for sums and averages and to calculate like the payment on a loan. There's all sorts of functions, and most of them accept parameters. And those parameters say specifically on what values do you want to perform this operation. I want a sum of what? I want an average of what? I want a square root, the square root of what? So, if we extend that to our example, we can create 3 arguments for this function. And I just put arg in front of it because it's talk like a pirate day. No, I'm just kidding. I put arg in front of it just to keep clear that this indeed is an argument. Arg image, arg name, arg description. I'm not then going to hard code this to be Jackson. I'm going to say set the big picture to whatever my image argument is. Set my name to whatever the name is. And then finally set the description to whatever the description is. Then, when I call the function, what I have to do is I have to supply those parameters. Just like I can't just say, give me the square root. Well, the square root of what? I can't say, I can no longer say change the cat, right? Change the cat to what? Well, change the cat to have an image of Jackson.jpg, the name of Jackson, and then finally a description. So now I have that function, and I'm giving it the 3 values. The value for the image, the value for the name, and the value for the description. When I call that function, those values get plugged into these arguments. So arg name now equals Jackson.jpg. Arg name equals Jackson. Arg description equals Jackson loves to eat. Think of these as like being placeholders. They hold the place, and when we call the function, we actually give those placeholders values. These are blanks that we're filling in when we call the function. All right? And I can do the same thing with Simba and with Cleo. So I can say, change the cat. This time I'm not changing the cat to Jackson.jpg. I'm changing it to Simba.jpg. And the cat's name isn't Jackson, but it's Simba. And the description isn't likes to eat, although Simba did in fact like to eat. All right. And finally I can do that for Cleo as well. Whoops. And now, when we go in, open this page, all 3 of them work, and they give the appropriate headings. I'm going to go and change that so on the initial load it matches up. In other words, what I observed is I'm doing the same thing for all 3 cats. The only thing that differs is the specific values I'm giving it. And therefore, I create arguments for those specific values, and when and think of those as placeholders or blanks that are going to get filled in. Then when I call the function, I actually fill in those blanks, all right, to complete it. This is what really, how can I say this? get a good grip on the way functions work, and the world is your oyster, as they say. I never understood that expression because no one I know likes oysters, but you get the idea. Understanding what makes for a good function, and there's more to functions than what I've covered, but this is enough for this class to get us started. All right, to get an appreciation of the intent and how you use them. But the proper use of functions is so key in good software development. All right, the idea is you don't want to repeat yourself over and over again. What I had before, I effectively had a series of instructions over and over again. I made a function for them, and then all I have to do is call that function in 3 places, and I'm done. All right, and I can give different arguments. Now, if I add a cat, all right, all I have to do, I don't have to rewrite that code. I just have to call the function and give the proper values for that cat, the proper values for the big image, the proper value for the name and the description. Or, if I add some piece of functionality to this, I only have to make that change in the function. All right, and I don't have to change it everywhere on the page. Questions about this? Now, to be sure, this is a lot to absorb, all right, in a relatively short amount of time. For your assignment, for your JavaScript assignment, you do not need to use a function if you don't want to. But if you feel you're understanding this well, by all means, give it a shot. All right, because if you do understand it and do get a grip on that, that will really put you in a good position to really understand this material. All right, I'm going to real quick save this and upload it, and then we'll get on with the evaluation. I'm sure you all have done evaluations before. Actually, I'm going to call them to tell them to stop recording because they don't need to record this for the online students.